I still remember the smell of that street. Burned paper. Wet concrete. Fear. I was 40 years old when I made the decision that would define what remained of my life. I had fought in the Polish-Soviet War. I had seen the Germans invade my country. I had watched Warsaw burn. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to do. They called it a Lepanka. A roundup. The Germans would seal off a district in Warsaw and take every man they could find. Most men hid. I did not. I stood on Aleja Niepodleglasai with my false papers in my pocket, wearing my oldest coat, waiting. My real name was Witold Pilecki. My false name was Tomasz Serafiński. I had memorized every detail of this invented life. Where I was born. My mother's maiden name. The street where I supposedly lived. My comrades in the resistance thought I was insane. Perhaps I was. But someone had to know. Someone had to see what was happening inside Auschwitz. The rumors were already spreading through occupied land, trains full of prisoners disappearing into that place, and silence. Only silence coming back. I watched the German soldiers move down the street, their boots clicking in formation. They were young, some of them. 18, 19 years old. They shouted in German, their voices sharp in the September air. People were crying. A woman clutched her son's arm, begging them not to take him. They took him anyway. When they grabbed me, I did not resist. I let them push me against the wall with the others. I felt the rough brick against my cheek. I smelled tobacco and sweat and terror. My heart was beating so hard I thought they might hear it. But I kept my face blank. Empty. I had volunteered for this. I had walked into their net willingly. I kept telling myself that as they loaded us into trucks. I had a mission. Gather intelligence. Organize resistance. Send reports to the outside world. Prove what was happening in that place. I did not know then that I was walking into hell itself. The train journey took one night and most of the next day. We were packed into cattle cars, so many men that we could not all sit at the same time. There was one bucket in the corner for waste. By the time we reached our destination, the smell was overwhelming. I was still Tomasz Serafiński. I repeated this to myself. Tomasz Serafiński. Born in Warsaw. No military record. No resistance connections. Just an ordinary man caught in a roundup. Some of the men around me were praying. Others were silent, their eyes distant. A boy near me, he could not have been more than 16, kept asking when we would be released. No one answered him. Through the gaps in the wooden slats, I caught glimpses of the Polish countryside. Fields I had known all my life. Villages with names I recognized. Then, as we moved further, places I had never seen. The landscape grew flatter. More desolate. When the train finally stopped, I heard dogs barking. Not the sound of farm dogs. These were different. Agras. Civ. Trained. The doors slammed open and the light flooded in, blinding after the darkness of the transport. Men in striped uniforms were screaming at us in German and broken Polish. Raus! Raus! Schnell! Out quickly. I stumbled down from the car with the others. My legs were stiff from standing. My mouth was dry. I saw the sign Auschwitz. I had volunteered to come here. I had to remember that. They made us stand in rows on the platform. It was late afternoon, but the sun felt cold. Autumn was coming. I could feel it in the wind. The SS officers walked between us, their uniforms immaculate. They did not look at our faces. We were already numbers to them. Not yet assigned, but already counted. Already catalogued. I watched everything. I memorized the layout of the buildings I could see. The watchtowers. The fences. The gates with those words. Arbeit macht frei. Work sets you free. Even then, I understood it was a lie. They took everything from us on that first day. Our clothes. Our belongings. Our hair. Our names. I became number 4859. They tattooed it on my left forearm with a needle that felt like it was carving into bone. I did not cry out. Many men did. The boy who had asked about being released was sobbing. I never learned his real name. Within 3 weeks, he was dead. The striped uniform they gave me was too large. The wooden clogs did not fit properly. I would learn later that this was intentional. Everything about Auschwitz was designed to strip away your humanity. To make you less than human? To break you. But I had come here with purpose. I held on to that through everything that followed. They assigned me to Block 17. It was one of the original brick buildings. The camp had been a Polish army barracks before the Germans took it. That first night, I learned what survival in Auschwitz truly meant. The capo, the prisoner in charge of our block, was a German criminal. A man sent to Auschwitz not for political reasons but for murder. The SS gave men like him power over us. They beat us for any reason. For no reason. For entertainment. We slept on wooden bunks, 3 levels high. 6 men to a bunk meant for 3. We lay on our sides because there was no room to lie on our backs. The man next to me was shaking with fever. Another had dysentery. The smell was indescribable. I did not sleep that first night. I listened. I learned. I heard men crying for their mothers. I heard prayers in Polish, German, Yiddish, Czech, Russian. I heard the sound of boots outside, guards making their rounds. I heard the distant sound of something I could not identify then, a low rumbling that never quite stopped. Later, I would learn it was the crematorium. In the darkness, I touched the number on my arm. 4859. I was Tomasz Serafinsky. I was here to document this place. To organize resistance. To survive long enough to tell the world what I saw. I had to believe that was still possible. We woke before dawn to the sound of a gong. The roll. They called it appel, happened in the dark, in the cold, in the rain, in the snow. It did not matter. We stood for hours sometimes. If someone had escaped, we stood until they were caught or until the SS grew tired of punishing us for another man's hope. Men collapsed during roll call. The guards would beat them where they fell. Sometimes they died there, in the dirt, while the rest of us stood at attention, staring straight ahead. The work was meant to kill us. They did not need to use gas or bullets for everyone. Starvation and exhaustion did much of their work for them. I was assigned to different work details in those early months. Carrying stones from one pile to another, then back again. Pointless labor designed only to break the body and spirit. Digging ditches in frozen ground. Unloading supplies from trucks while SS men watched with their dogs. The food was barely enough to keep a man alive. In the morning, a bitter liquid they called coffee. At midday, a watery so. Pea with perhaps a few pieces of turnip or potato. In the evening, a piece of bread and sometimes a thin scraping of margarine or a slice of sausage so small you could see through it. I watched men transform into living skeletons. The camp called them Musulmaner, Muslims, though I never understood why. They were the men who had given up. Who shuffled instead of walked. Whose eyes no longer focused on anything. They were already dead. Their bodies just had not stopped yet. I made myself eat every scrap of food, no matter how rotten. I made myself drink the foul water. I made myself keep moving, keep thinking, keep planning. Because I had a mission. I did not expect to find others like me in Auschwitz. But they were there. Slowly, carefully, I began to identify men I could trust. It took months. You could not be careless. The SS had informants everywhere. A wrong word to the wrong person meant death, not quick death, but torture first. Death in the starvation bunker or the standing cell. Or the wall where they shot prisoners between Block 10 and Block 11. I found a doctor named the Ladislaw Deering. A cavalry officer named Jerzy Davirion. A priest named Konstanty Piekarski. There were others. We built our network carefully, one man at a time. We called ourselves the Union of Military Organizations. We gathered intelligence, the layout of the camp, the number of guards, the schedules of the patrols. We stole small items that might be useful. A piece of wire. A scrap of paper. A stub of pencil. We documented the murders. The selections. The medical experiments. Every detail we could observe. And we sent reports to the outside world. This was the most dangerous part. We had to find prisoners who were being released. Yes, in the early days, some prisoners were still released, and convince them to smuggle out our messages. Written in invisible ink, or coded language. Hidden in the linings of clothes or in hollowed-out pieces of wood. I wrote those reports in my mind first, memorizing every word before I dared put them on paper. I described the gas chambers that were being built, the mass executions, the starvation, the disease, the daily death toll that numbered in the dozens, then the hundreds. I hoped someone outside was reading them. I hoped someone believed them. I had no way to know. In 1941, the camp began to change. They were building something new at a place called Birkenau, Auschwitz II. We could see it from the main camp. Acres of barracks rising from cleared ground. New railroad tracks being laid. The transports increased. Not just political prisoners now. Jews. Roma. Soviet prisoners of war. They came in trainloads. Thousands at a time. I saw the selections on the ramp. SS doctors pointing left or right. Life or death decided in seconds. The elderly, the children, the sick, they went to the left. To the gas chambers that we now knew existed, though the SS tried to disguise them as shower rooms. The smoke from the crematoria became constant. Tea, day and night. The smell permeated everything. Your clothes. Your hair. Your skin. You could not escape it. I continued documenting. I continued organizing. But the scale of what was happening had grown beyond anything I had imagined when I volunteered for this mission. This was not just a concentration camp. This was a factory of death. I was living inside the machinery of genocide, and I was trying to build resistance with starving men using scraps of wire and stolen pencils. Some nights, lying on that wooden bunk with men dying on either side of me, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. If this mission had been folly from the beginning. But in the morning, I would wake up. I was still alive. I was still 48-59. I still had work to do. There are things I witnessed in Auschwitz that I have never been able to speak about. Not to my family. Not to the authorities who interviewed me after the war. Not to anyone. I saw a mother try to hide her child during a selection. ISA. What the guards did when they found the child. I saw the medical experiments. Prisoners used as test subjects for drugs, for surgeries, for torture disguised as science. Dr. Mengele had not yet arrived, but others were already there, doing their work in the name of the Reich. I saw hangings in the courtyard. We were forced to watch. The SS wanted us to see what happened to anyone who resisted. Anyone who tried to escape. Anyone who broke their rules. I saw men lose their minds. I saw men lose their faith. I saw men do terrible things to survive, steal bread from the dying, inform on their friends, take positions as capos and become as brutal as the Germans themselves. And I saw extraordinary courage. I saw men share their last piece of bread. I saw priests hear confessions knowing they might be beaten for it. I saw men refuse to betray their comrades even under torture. I saw humanity persist in a place designed to destroy it. I tried to be a witness to all of it. To remember the names. To remember the faces. To remember the details that would prove this had happened. Because I knew, even then I knew, that the world would find this hard to believe. In the summer of 1942, I fell ill with typhus. The camp hospital, the Revier, was a place most prisoners feared. Many who entered never left. The SS conducted selections there regularly, sending the sick to the gas chambers to make room for new prisoners. But I had made contacts in the hospital through our resistance network. Doctors and nurses who were prisoners themselves. They hid me in a section where the SS rarely inspected. They shared their meager medicines. They kept me off the selection lists. I remember the fever. The hallucinations. I was back in my family home, before the war. I could see my wife's face. My children. I could hear their voices calling to me. I remember fighting to stay conscious. Fighting to stay alive. Because if I died here, the reports would stop. The documentation would stop. The RLD would never know. It took weeks to recover. When I finally stood again, I could barely walk. I had lost weight I could not afford to lose. My body was wrecked. But I was alive. I was still 48-59. I still had work to do. The resistance network had grown in my absence. We had men in nearly every section of the camp now. In the SS offices, prisoners who cleaned and could read documents when the guards were not looking. In the warehouses, prisoners who could steal supplies. In the kitchen, prisoners who could slip extra food to those who needed it most. We were preparing for something we all knew was probably impossible, an uprising. A coordinated revolt that would destroy the gas chambers and allow prisoners to escape. We sent reports to the Polish resistance outside, begging for support. For weapons. For a coordinated attack from the outside to match our uprising from within. We waited for a response that never came. By early 1943, I had been in Auschwitz for nearly 3 years. The longest years of my life. I had seen more death than I thought possible. I had documented it all, sent report after report to the outside world. But I had received no indication that anyone was acting on the information. No sign that the world believed what was happening here. No support for the uprising we were planning. I made the decision to escape. I needed to deliver the reports in person. To look people in the eyes and make them understand. To force them to believe. Escape from Auschwitz was nearly impossible. The camp was surrounded by electrified fences, watchtowers with machine guns, patrols with dogs. Prisoners who tried to escape and were caught were tortured and hanged as examples. But I had spent 3 years studying every detail of the camp's security. I had contacts who worked in the SS offices, in the bakery, in the workshops outside the main camp. We planned carefully. 3 of us would go, myself, Jan Redzig, and Edward Shishelsky. We would hide in a work show. Building overnight, then use stolen SS uniforms and documents to walk out through the gate. It was insane. But I had done insane things before. On the night of April 26, 1943, we hid in the bakery warehouse. We lay silent behind bags of flour while the guards made their evening rounds. My heart was pounding so loud I was certain they would hear it. We waited until after midnight. Then we changed into the stolen uniforms. They fit poorly, but in the dark, we hoped it would not matter. The hardest part was cutting through the barbed wire at the outer perimeter. We had wire cutters we had stolen months before. Every snap of the wire sounded like thunder to my ears. But we made it through. And we ran. We ran through the Polish countryside in stolen SS uniforms, knowing that if the Germans caught us, death would be merciful compared to what they would do to us first. We ran toward Warsaw. Toward freedom. Toward the chance to make the world listen. When I finally reached Warsaw, I looked like a ghost. I had lost more than 50 pounds. My hair was gray. My body was covered in scars and sores that would never fully heal. But I was free. And I had the testimony of Auschwitz burning in my mind. I reported immediately to the Polish underground. I told them everything. I gave them the details of the camp layout, the numbers of prisoners, the industrial scale of the murder. I told them about the gas chambers at Birkenau. About the crematoria that ran day and night. About the trainloads of Jews arriving from across Europe, being selected on the ramp, being murdered within hours of arrival. I told them about the children. They listened. They wrote it all down. They sent the reports to the Polish government in exile in London. To the British. To the Americans. And the world did nothing. Oh, the information was received. I know that now. The reports reached the highest levels of the Allied governments. They knew. They knew what was happening at Auschwitz, at Treblinka, at Sobibor, at all the death camps. But they made the calculation that winning the war was the priority. That bombing the camps, or the railroad lines leading to them, would divert resources from the military campaign. That the Jews and Poles and Roma, and all the others being murdered, would have to wait for liberation. Liberation that came too late for millions. I have never forgiven them for that. I understand the complexities of war. I understand the difficult choices that leaders must make. But I cannot forgive the decision to let the machinery of genocide continue when they had the power to at least disrupt it. After I escaped Auschwitz, I did not rest. I could not. I rejoined the resistance in Warsaw. I fought in the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, when the Polish Home Army rose against the German occupation. We thought the Soviets would help us. They were just across the Vistula River. We could hear their artillery. But they waited. They let the Germans crush us. They let Warsaw burn. For 63 days we fought. I commanded troops in the old town. I watched civilians used as human shields. I watched the Germans destroy my city block by block. When we finally surrendered, I was taken prisoner again. But this time I was a prisoner of war, not a concentration camp inmate. The Geneva Conventions applied. It was a different kind of captivity. But I had learned in Auschwitz that survival was a matter of will. I survived the POW camp. I survived the forced marches as the Germans retreated. I survived until the end of the war. When the war ended, I thought I might finally rest. I thought my fight was over. I was wrong. The Soviets occupied Poland. They installed a communist government. And they saw people like me, Home Army soldiers, people loyal to the Polish government in exile, people who had resisted one totalitarian regime, as threats to their new totalitarian regime. I continued to resist. I gathered intelligence on the communist government. I sent reports to the Polish government in exile, just as I had sent reports from Auschwitz. In 1947, the secret police arrested me. They tortured me for information. They wanted the names of other resistance members. The names of people working against the communist regime. I did not break in Auschwitz. I did not break in German POW camps. I did not break now. They put me on trial in 1948. A show trial. The charges were fabricated, spying for the West, planning to assassinate communist officials. The outcome was predetermined. They sentenced me to death. On May 25, 1948, in Mokoto prison in Warsaw, they took me to the execution chamber. I was 47 years old. I had survived Auschwitz. I had survived the Warsaw Uprising. I had survived the war. But I could not survive the peace. I sit here now, or rather, my memory sits here, because I have been dead for many years, and I think about the choices I made. I chose to walk into Auschwitz. I volunteered for hell because someone needed to witness. Someone needed to document. Someone needed to try to make the world believe. I saw things in that place that no human being should have to see. I lived through experiences that should have broken me. Many men stronger than me did break. They died or lost their minds or lost their humanity. But I held on. I organized resistance in the heart of genocide. I sent reports to the outside world. I escaped to deliver my testimony in person. And still, the world did not act in time to save the millions who died in those camps. After the war, I tried again to fight for freedom. For a free Poland. For the country I had fought for all my life. And I was executed by a regime wearing a different uniform but practicing the same kind of totalitarian brutality. Was it worth it? I ask myself that question often, in whatever passes for consciousness after death. I think of the men I met in Auschwitz. The men who joined the resistance knowing they would almost certainly die. The men who r'd their bread. The men who kept their humanity in the face of machinery designed to destroy it. I think of the reports I sent. The testimony I gave. Even if the world did not act then, the world knows now. The evidence I gathered, that other prisoners gathered, that the survivors testified to, it became part of the historical record. It became proof that could not be denied. I think of my family. My wife who waited for me. My children who grew up without a father for so many years. They paid a price for my choices. And I think of the children I saw on the ramp at Auschwitz. The ones who went to the left. Who were murdered within hours of arrival. Who had no choice at all. Yes. It was worth it. Because the alternative was to do nothing. To let it happen without witness. To let the perpetrators destroy not just the lives but the memory of millions. I was one man with a false name and a number tattooed on my arm. I was one man who decided that bearing witness was more important and survival, though I fought like hell to do both. I was Witold Pilecki. I walked into Auschwitz voluntarily. I organized resistance inside genocide. I escaped to tell the truth. And I would do it again. The world knew. That is what I want you to understand. The world knew what was happening at Auschwitz, at the other death camps, and chose military strategy over intervention. I do not say this to condemn the soldiers who fought. They were brave men doing an impossible job. I do not even fully condemn the leaders who made those decisions. War is complicated. Resources are limited. Choices must be made. But I do condemn the silence that followed. The way it took decades for the full truth to be acknowledged. The way witnesses like me were ignored or dismissed. The way some people, even now, try to deny what happened. I was there. I saw it. I documented it. I risked everything to make sure the world would know. 6 million Jews murdered. 3 million Polish citizens. Roma. Soviet. Prisoners of war. Disabled people. Political prisoners. Homosexuals. Jehovah's Witnesses. Anyone who did not fit the Nazi vision of the world. I knew some of their names. I remembered some of their faces. Most I could not save. But I could remember. I could testify. That is the burden I carried out of Auschwitz. The burden of witnessing. The burden of survival when so many died. The burden of knowing. For 40 years after my execution, I was forgotten. The communist regime in Poland erased me from history. My family could not speak about me. The reports I had sent, the testimony I had given, it was buried. But history has a way of revealing the truth eventually. In 1990, after communism fell in Poland, I was exonerated. My death sentence was declared invalid. My reputation was restored. In 2006, I was posthumously awarded the Order of the White Eagle, Poland's highest decoration. In 2013, I was honored by Israel as righteous among the nations. But these honors mean little to a dead man. What matters is this: the truth survived. The testimony survived. The reports I sent from Auschwitz, written in invisible ink and smuggled out in the clothes of released prisoners, they survived. They became part of the historical record. They became evidence at the Nuremberg trials. They became proof that could not be denied. I went into Auschwitz as Tomasz Serafiński, prisoner number 4859. I came out as Witold Pilecki, witness to genocide. I died as a condemned traitor in a communist prison. But I live now as a reminder. A reminder of what one person can do. A reminder of the importance of bearing witness. A reminder that silence is complicity. If you are listening to this story, if you have stayed with me through this long and difficult journey, I want to tell you something. You may never face the choices I faced. You may never have to decide whether to walk voluntarily into hell. You may never have to organize resistance inside a death camp or escape through electrify defenses or face execution for your beliefs. I hope you never face these choices. But you will face other choices. Smaller, perhaps, but no less important. You will see injustice. You will see cruelty. You will see people in power abusing those without power. You will see lies being told and truth being suppressed. And you will have to decide, do I speak? Do I act? Do I bear witness? It is not easy. Speaking truth carries consequences. Resisting carries risks. Bearing witness can cost you everything. But silence costs more. Silence costs 6 million Jewish lives. Silence cost millions more who died in camps across Europe. Silence allowed the machinery of genocide to operate with industrial efficiency. I was one man who refused to be silent. One man who decided that bearing witness was a duty more important than safety or comfort, or even life itself. You do not have to be me. You do not have to volunteer for Auschwitz. But you do have to live with integrity. You do have to speak truth when you see lies. You do have to stand up for others when they cannot stand for themselves. That is what I learned. That is what I tried to do. That is the legacy I hope to leave. I am an old man now, in the only way a dead man can be old. My body was destroyed decades ago. But my memory lives on. My testimony lives on. I closed my eyes and I am back on that street in Warsaw in September 1940. I am 40 years old and I am about to do the most insane thing I have ever done. I am about to volunteer for Auschwitz. I can still feel the fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that I might be walking to my death. But I can also feel the conviction. Someone had to know. Someone had to see. Someone had to tell the truth. I became that someone. I was Witold Pilecki, cavalry officer, resistance fighter, Auschwitz prisoner 4859, witness to genocide, escapee, testify, Warsaw Uprising commander, communist prisoner, executed patriot. I was a man who saw the worst that humanity can do to itself, and still believed that bearing witness mattered. I was a man who survived Auschwitz, but not the peace. I was a man who chose courage over safety, truth over silence, resistance over collaboration. I was a man who made a difference, even if I did not live to see it recognized. And if my story makes you think, makes you question, makes you promise yourself that you will not be silent in the face of injustice, then my life, my suffering, my death, they all meant something. The world tried to forget me. But the truth cannot be forgotten forever. I am Witold Pilecki. I walked into Auschwitz voluntarily, and I walked out to tell the truth. Remember me. Remember them. Remember what happened when the world chose silence. And choose differently.